Hey, it's Nora, and lately I've been thinking about why middle and high school start so freaking early in the morning. Turns out there's a nationwide movement to delay school start times. No earlier than 8:30 in the morning would be best, according to scientists who say it's dangerous for teens to be going to school so early for a whole host of reasons. A lot of school districts have made the change.
A shakeup in start times for Mason City schools, and tonight hundreds gathered to hear about this big change coming in the fall.
But there's also resistance to the idea, mostly because of money. Why does changing a school's start time cost money? And why do supporters say that cost is more than worth it? Let's dig in. The vast majority of American middle and high schools start before 8:30 in the morning. Some starting so early that school bus pickups begin as early as 5 in the morning. Why so early? We need to back up and talk about how we got here. Educational trends have changed significantly over time as schooling moved from a hyper-local experience in one-room schoolhouses to the larger public schools we have today. Until about 1970, most schools started around 9 o'clock in the morning. That's according to the executive director of advocacy group Start School Later, Snyder, who has a PhD in the history of science and medicine and has spent decades researching school start times. For example, she found an 1878 annual report from New Haven, Connecticut. The school day began around 9 a.m. for all ages and ran until noon, when there was a full 2-hour break for lunch. Then, students returned to the classroom from 2 to 5 in the afternoon. Granted, kids in 1878 were getting up at the crack of dawn anyway to help the family, sometimes with farm chores, before school, but they weren't expected to sit and absorb new information until later in the morning. Dr. Snyder also points out that going to school at all was not really the norm until the 20th century. She traces the change to the 1970s, when economic problems pushed many school districts into budget cuts. To save money, many districts eliminated some of their school buses and bus drivers. They moved middle and high school start times earlier so that the same buses could do their pickup and drop-offs and then circle back for the younger kids. Thus, high schools and middle schools began to start much earlier in the morning. So that's where we are today. Schools saved money, but what was the trade-off? Well, research shows that the change in the 70s had a sizable health and safety impact. And in the face of that research, the official position of the CDC is, to put it bluntly, schools start too early. Why? 1, sleep deprivation. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends teenagers sleep at least 8.5 hours a night, but the majority of teens aren't getting that. This isn't just a millennial, Gen Z, smartphone-induced up-all-night texting problem. The scientific community has actually known about this for decades. Rabbit hole. Researchers have found that circadian rhythms change during adolescence. They say teenagers release melatonin, the hormone that makes you feel sleepy, later than when younger children do. Mary Carskadden has studied sleep in children and adolescents since the 1970s. As she put it in a 2011 paper, the onset of the biological night is later for teenagers. And again, the scientific community has known this for decades, but it takes time for scholarly research to trickle down to public awareness. There was some movement on the issue in the 1990s. Between 96 and 98, the time of gel pens, baby teas, and the Macarena, several Minnesota high schools moved start times later, from 7:20 and 7:15 to 8:30 and 8:40, respectively. Researchers studied the results. Preliminary findings, based on teachers' reports, showed that students were more alert during early classes when school started later, and they saw fewer students sleeping on their desks. School nurses and counselors reported fewer students with physical complaints or stress, according to that study. It's important to note here that this isn't just like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if children didn't feel so tired at school? Sleep-deprived teens aren't just cranky, they can be dangerous to themselves and others. A study recently published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that being sleep-deprived as a teenager was associated with riskier behaviors, including drunk driving, potentially unsafe sexual activity, aggressive behavior, and the use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And finally, the CDC says studies have shown that sleep deprivation leads students to perform poorly in class, which of course makes sense. In the face of all this research, parents, educators, scientists, and doctors are trying to make changes. The researcher I mentioned earlier, Snyder, co-founded a national nonprofit called Start School Later, with more than 100 chapters across the country. They're pushing for action both on the state level, to change laws either requiring or incentivizing districts to start school later, and on the local level. Most school districts have the power to set their own start times, often with the approval of the school boards. The official recommendation from both the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Medical Association is that school should not start before 8:30 in the morning. In 2014, 93% of American high schools started before then, according to the CDC. Seattle is a solid example of local action. In 2016, the Seattle Board of Education voted to move all high school start times nearly an hour later to 8:45. Researchers studying the change found that students got a median of 34 more minutes of sleep, found an improvement in grades, and a reduction in tardiness and absences. Some school districts are following Seattle's lead, but others have concerns, including the impact on working parents.
I have to figure out my time, and I'm lucky that I have flex time and I'm able to come and go, but many people are not.
You also have to look at the logistics of working families. If the high school student gets home later than the elementary child, they're unable to babysit for their younger sibling.
Other districts are concerned sports practices and other extracurricular activities would be pushed later in the afternoon and evening. But arguably, the most serious hurdle is cost. Consider what happened in Missoula, Montana last year, as reported by the Missoulian. The school district considered the issue, and after a lot of discussion, board members agreed students would benefit from the later start time. But when it came time to actually remap the school bus routes, the district found out they'd need 14 additional bus routes since they didn't have enough buses to pick up students of all ages at the same time. Each new route cost $44,000 annually, which came out to a whopping $616,000 total. The school superintendent told the board that would be paid by taxpayers. 13 months later, they're still trying to figure out another option. Stories like that scare school districts away from even considering changing start times. But transportation experts say it's all about trade-offs. I spoke to Tim Amon, a school bus consultant who helps districts figure out this issue. Rabbit hole. Tim explained that there are a lot of variables that go into calculating bus routes beyond just school start times, including how long students have to sit on the bus, how early pickups can start, and how late they can be dropped off at school, both in the morning and afternoon. He says there's almost always a zero-cost solution when changing start times. It's just often not ideal. For instance, requiring some students to wait after school for a second wave of pickups rather than getting on the bus right when the final bell rings. It comes down to a value judgment, he says, about what's most important for a district. And it's super localized. Each district will have different needs, variables, and constraints. An easy solution for one district, just swap elementary and high school start times, for example, might not work for another district that has wildly different numbers of students in elementary versus high school. Supporters of moving school start times say that policymakers shouldn't look at changing start times like a budget line item.
It can't be seen that way. This is actually a real health issue. It's just like, we've decided that it's not good to have asbestos in schools, and schools find a way to get rid of it because they have to. It's not a choice.
At the end of the day, the science is the science. It's healthier and safer for schools to move middle and high school start times later. The question is whether there's political will and logistical and financial support behind the change. In other words, is it worth it? And that's probably more than you wanted to know.